I've been told that I'm not supposed to leave this carpet, but it kind of makes me want to leave the carpet. Get wrecked, John. Take that. I just preach over there and it's just out of shot the whole time. Okay, welcome everybody. How's it going? Mixed emotions. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. We are actually jumping back into the Gospel Project tonight, and we will be camping in Judges chapter 4. So if you have a Bible, turn there, and we will begin in a minute. But today's a special night. We are going to be talking about one of the most influential women, I didn't say men, I said women in the Bible. Yeah, that's right. We are actually going to be talking about the story of Deborah today. But first, a little bit of context before we jump into Judges. The book of Judges is kind of a mess, okay? And it has nothing to do with the amazing ways that God provides for the Israelites. It has everything to do with the Israelites' continuous cycle of sin, okay? So I could summarize Judges right here, right now. Are you ready? The Israelites, they go, they sin, okay? God says, fine, I'm going to hand you over to your enemies. The Israelites cry. They cry because they're sad and because the people are oppressing them. They cry out to God. God says, okay, I'll give you a judge. And they can kind of tell you what's right and wrong. I give them my wisdom. So then the judge is there. Things are okay. And then the judge dies. The judge dies. He's kaput. And then the whole cycle goes over again. The book of Judges is like one of those terrible looping movies where the character constantly is waking up in the same place and time every day, and they're trying to do something different to break that cycle. That's the book of Judges, but there's a lot that we can learn from this book. Have you ever felt like you've been in a similar cycle with God where things are going really good and you're like, hey, I could maybe kind of do this on my own. This is great. Everything's great. And then maybe a relationship you have or a friendship just falls apart, or you have a big fight with somebody, or maybe you even lose a loved one and you're back in that spot of being like, God, I need your help. That's the cycle that we know really well and the Israelites also know really well. So things are pretty bleak at this point. The Israelites are currently being oppressed by King Jabin and his people, and they cry out to God, and God sends them Deborah. Now, there's a lot we can learn from the faithfulness of Deborah and the warrior Barak's doubt. And we're going to take a look at kind of where we land in this story, and we're also going to look at how our victory is ultimately found in Jesus. Jesus is the only person that can truly break that cycle of sin. So let's jump into the story and see what we can learn from Deborah and Barak. So we're starting in Judges chapter 4, verse 4. So it says, Deborah, the wife of Lapdoth, a prophet who was judging Israel at the time, she would sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel, hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites would go to her for judgment. Now, right off the bat, we don't really see anything really special about Deborah, but there's actually more to Deborah than meets the eye. She was a prophetess and a judge. What does that mean? So if she was a prophetess, that meant she spoke the word of the Lord to his people. So God would tell her what to speak directly to his people. She was also a judge, a person chosen by God to give counsel to the people and to settle any disputes of the people. And there's actually only one other person in the Bible that was both a prophet and a judge, and that was Samuel. So right away, the job that Deborah's been given is pretty unique. And the job that she was given, it required, either one of those roles required you to fully submit to God. Deborah's job wasn't easy. She wasn't on this super high pedestal and looking down on everyone. She often had to tell God's people what they didn't want to hear. People who were going through cycles of sin, and she had to say, hey, look, what you're doing right now, that's going to lead to some stuff that you are not going to like. And she also was constantly in the middle of arguments and settling those arguments. Like, have you ever had an argument with a sibling and you come to your parent about it and then they blame you? And like, the parent's like, nope, that is your fault in this situation. You're like, what the heck? Like, Deborah was that person that did that. And there are a number of, like, on top of that, a number of physical and cultural barriers that Deborah would have faced being in the position that she was in. She was a woman with a lot less rights than we have today. It wasn't uncommon for women to be in leadership roles, but it definitely wasn't like a super common thing that happened. So there were some struggles with that as well. And the second thing, she wasn't a military leader or a warrior. All the other judges before her were fierce warriors who led Israel into battle and defeated their enemies, and that wasn't Deborah. But regardless of those obstacles that stood in Deborah's way, she had faith in where God had put her. And how did she do it all? That's kind of like what I get when I'm looking at the character of Deborah. How did she do it? She had faith in what God could do through her. She didn't have faith in herself. She didn't have faith in other people. She had faith in what God could do. And that's the important part. You see, we look at Deborah and you think, dang, she's killing it. Like, she's a judge. She's like speaking God's word to the people. Like, she's killing the game. But she doesn't actually have it all together. God does. And she trusts in God in that. But that doesn't mean that Deborah didn't have doubts. Listen to this, friends. The faith of a sinner isn't marked by a complete absence of doubt. The faith of a sinner is recognizing those doubts and choosing to believe in God anyways. And that's what Deborah did. She didn't have it all together. There were doubts that she had, but she chose to trust in God anyways. Let's jump back into the story and look at the warrior Barak and his faith. Starting at verse 6, it says, "One day she sent Barak, son of Abinoam, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. She said to him, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribe of Naphtali and Zebulun at the Mount Tabor, and I will call out Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, along with his chariots and warriors to the Kishon River. There I will give you victory over him.'" So quick, there's a lot of characters here, so let's get some stuff straight. Deborah, prophetess, judge. Barak, he is the warrior. And then over here we have King Jabin, who is the king over the people that are oppressing the Israelites. And then we have Sisera, who is the commander of Jabin's army. So we have Deborah and Barak, good. Jabin and Sisera, bad. Okay? You staying with me? You holding up? So Deborah sends for Barak and appoints him to lead their people against their oppressors with God's command. And Deborah essentially gives Barak the cheat code to win this war. She says how many soldiers he needs, where they should camp out, and how they're going to attack. And that's all through God's word. And Barak's a warrior. His name literally translates to lightning. So you think this guy's like some super buff guy who's like, yeah, let's go to war. I've been given the cheat codes. We've got this. Let's go. But what Barak says in verse 8 is telling. Barak told her, "I will go, but only if you go with me." Now I read that and I was like, seriously, dude? Like, you have, like, basically a victory has been placed in your lap. And you're saying, I don't really know. Can you come with me? Like, why is he doing that? But what we see in Barak is what we often experience ourselves, and that is a conditional faith. See, God commanded Barak through Deborah, and then we get the, yeah, okay, God, that sounds cool, but like, can Deborah come with me? Friends, listen to this. It's easy to kind of just discard what Barak does in this moment, but it's important because a conditional faith and conditional obedience to God is really just disobedience and sin. Barak's refusal to go without Deborah is important. Barak obviously found it difficult to fully surrender and have faith in what God was telling him to do in that moment. And he had his faith actually unjustly rooted in a person, in Deborah. And that's a dangerous place to be. How many of you have been hurt by someone you've trusted? Put up your hand. There's a lot of hands. Everyone, I feel like, has had this happen at one moment or time. And why is that? Because we're trusting in broken people that make mistakes just like us. And sometimes we put our faith in ourselves instead of God. And when we have a conditional faith in God, and we hear his calling for us, but we're like, yeah, God, that's great, but if we could just make a couple tweaks, that would be awesome. When we do that, we are unjustly trying to put ourselves on the same level as God in those moments. When we say, God, that's cool, and I'm down, but, God, I know you want me to kind of talk to this person in youth group or at school because they don't really have any friends, but I don't really want to go do that. I don't want to step out of my comfort zone. Or, God, I know the friends I'm hanging out with, they don't really make me the best person that I can be, but we have so much fun. Or, God, I want to step out in faith and follow you and see what your plan is for me, but I am comfortable where I'm at. See, when we try and make important decisions in our lives without talking and seeking God for guidance, we are trying to put ourselves on that pedestal. We are trying to say to God, listen, step aside, I've got this. And what Deborah says next can only be explained by someone who's had a taste of God's mercy and provision. This is what she says in verse 9. Very well, she replied, I will go with you. Deborah, the lady who has zero experience being a warrior going to war, is a woman who is never taken to war. She said, yeah, I'll go with you. Why does she do that? Because she has complete faith in God and what he said he's going to do. Not in what she can do. She doesn't even know how to hold a sword, from what we know. She has no idea what to do in battle. But Deborah is the type of leader that was willing to get her hands dirty. She wasn't about to tell people to do something that she wasn't willing to do herself for God. But what she says to Barak, when Barak admits this, it doesn't come without consequence. She says to Barak, but you will receive no honor in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, and at Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, and 10,000 warriors went up with him, and Deborah also went with him. See, Barak in this situation had a conditional faith, so he was given a conditional victory. See, his honor of killing the enemy's commander, of being able to kill Sisera, was taken from him in this moment. And because of Barak's conditional faith, he didn't get to fully experience the goodness and the fullness of all that God had planned for him in this story. And with Sisera and Jabin's army in place, with the enemy right where they wanted them, Deborah cries out to Barak and says in verse 14, get ready, this is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you. Can you imagine how encouraging that would be to know the creator of the universe, their God, was marching ahead of them into battle? The front lines, one of the most dangerous places to be, and God was going ahead of them into that. And friends, when we trust in God, God goes before us into those tough situations. Whether that's at school or at home or in the community, God will go before you if you surrender and trust in him in those tough times. And then it goes on to say, so Barak led his 10,000 warriors down the slopes of Mount Tabor into battle. When Barak attacked, the Lord threw Sisera and all of his chariots and warriors into panic. Sisera leapt down from his chariot and escaped on foot. Then Barak chased the chariots and the enemy and the army all the way to Harosheth Hagoyim, killing all of Sisera's warriors. Not a single one was left alive, except for one, Sisera. He was a sissy. He ran away, and he ran away to a nearby tent, the tent of Jael, a Kenite woman. Now, this family in this tent, they didn't really have any beef with the Israelites. They didn't have any beef with King Jabin, so Sisera thought he was safe. So Jael accepted him into her tent, hid him. He falls asleep with Jael keeping watch. And while he's sleeping, Jael takes a tent peg and a mallet and drives it through his temple. And in the Bible, it says that his head was pinned to the ground. So she drove that sucker all the way through. And then it says in the Bible, and then he died. And I'm like, no, duh, he died. Like, he was like stuck to the ground. But remember Deborah's words to Barak in verse 9. You will receive no honor in this venture, for the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman. A woman who was literally just chilling in her house, a woman that had no business being in a battle, was the one that ended the battle and gave the victory to Israel. Another unlikely hero in this story, Jael, a woman used by God in an unconventional way. See, there's so much we can learn from Deborah in this story. She was a woman not without doubt, but a woman who faithfully surrendered to God's calling in her life. A woman who, regardless of the perceived barriers in her way, surrendered to God's calling. A woman who embraced God's plan in her life. Imagine if we stepped out in faith like Deborah did. Imagine having the honor of being a part of something like that. Fully embracing and stepping into God's plan for our lives. And we can be encouraged by Barak in this story as well, friends. Even though Barak had a conditional faith in God, God still used him to deliver the Israelites from Sisera. He was gracious with Barak even though he didn't deserve it. And Barak's conditional faith might have been given a conditional victory. But friends, that is not the case for us. And that is something to celebrate. Because of Jesus, we receive the ultimate victory. An eternal salvation with God the Father. And guess what? Doesn't matter how much we struggle with our faith. Doesn't matter if we're a Barak or a Deborah. Jesus has paid that price for us, and we have that ultimate victory, the greatest victory we could ever receive, an undeserved victory for us sinners. See, God doesn't abandon us in our doubt. We see it in the story. God continued to deliver the Israelites regardless of the mistakes that they had made because he loved and cared for them, and he loves and cares for you. But ultimately, this story boils down to this. What do you want your story to be? What do you want your story to be? Are you going to acknowledge your sins and your doubts and your shortcomings and have a faith in Jesus regardless of that, like Deborah did? Or are you going to allow people or allow yourself doubt to keep you from experiencing the fullness and the blessings of living in a life that God has for you? See, Jesus is the only one who can break that cycle of sin. What do you want your story to be? God is gracious and God is merciful, and we have an option to change what we want our story to be. Thank goodness we can change our minds. But what do you want your story to be? That's up to you. I'm going to pray, and then you guys can go to your small groups.